For example, in Christianity, right? All four of the biblical texts recount after Jesus' resurrection that he was seen. But every single one of them is different. Each one of those stories. Some was seen by the women, some by men. And they filled that with meaning of what that meant for him to come back. Humanity spent 2,000 years endowing that event with meaning, sometimes very differently depending on the religion. In Islam, for example, you have Muhammad, while meditating in a cave, he's seized by this, it almost sounds like he has a heart attack. And he hears the voice of what he believes is Gabriel, reciting to him, telling him to send this message to the world. That's what the Quran means, it means recitation. Another times he has a dream where he goes up to heaven and he meets all of the prophets, including Jesus and Moses, and he's sort of like given a little bit of an induction. Here's you're one of the prophets, you're one of us up there. Islam assumes that the voice of Muhammad heard were not ramblings of a disassociated mind, but the prophecies of the angel Gabriel sent by Allah to give to the world. And of course, as we heard, Native Americans, cultures, different ones, such as Black Elks, Oglalas, Lakota, they see visions as gifts from spirits sent to watch over a tribe. Now, they don't make the bearer of these visions divine or anything necessarily, although they do give them a certain amount of power. Black Elk was a shaman, for example. They made him a medicine man. So the problem I think that many of us have with these visions or supernatural experiences is not so much that it happened, but how they get interpreted. When something happens that we can't explain, some people assume there must be a supernatural cause. And further, that the bearers of these visions must be extraordinary and given power because of them. Sometimes they're even deified. Because we don't know or we don't understand the experience, then we fill that gap with extraordinary meaning. And so stories and theologies and cosmologies are then created. And on top of this, in order to accept the meaning of these experiences, many will simply reject science. If it conflicts, they say, well, we can't do it. Think of the Creation Museum right in Kentucky. It's kind of fascinating. It's going to be millions of years old because the Earth is only 2,000 years old. Because that's what the Bible says, and anything in conflict with that can't be true. And they'll reject any of the findings, carbon dating, whatever it is. They've got a really, actually I went out to their website, they've got a very rational way of explaining it all. It's kind of fascinating, like, huh, okay. It is meaning making wrong. Was Black Elk wrong to make meaning out of the vision that he saw that helped unite some of his tribes? Was Muhammad wrong? Were Christians wrong? There's no easy answers for any of that. Meaning is vital to our health as a species, but I think we need to be cautious about how we make meaning, as it can do a lot of damage as well. If done right, the meaning made from these experiences can also open our minds. You know, one thing is kind of interesting. One of the most famous people who was fooled by Francis and Elsie in our story, The Cottingley Fairies, was none other than Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Anybody know him? Anybody know who he is? He wrote The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. You would think that he, if anyone, might be skeptical. He might be the last person you would think would be inclined to believe in him, but he definitely believed in them. In fact, he was instrumental in the promotion of those pictures as authentic. Part of what was going on then in the early 20th century was this rejection of anything spiritual by many people who just wanted to embrace just science. And he felt that there was mystery that was missing. He wrote this, he said, "The recognition of the fairies' existence will jolt the material 20th century mind out of its heavy ruts in the mud, and will make it admit that there is a glamour and mystery to life. Having discovered this, the world will not find it so difficult to accept the spiritual message supported by physical facts, which has already been put before it." He might have been a little wrong, I'm not sure. Now, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, he was railing against those, as I said, who go to that extreme and reject any interpretation of extraordinary experiences not based in known science. They make the assumption, the people who do that, they make the assumption that everything has to be explained by science, or at least come close to it. For example, the use of those psychological terms like disassociation to explain visions. It is a psychological thing, but what's the difference between a hallucination and a vision? Is it the meaning that we give it? Or is it something more fundamental? We often describe the effect of an experience, but we don't know the cause of an experience. Say that again. We often describe the effect of an experience, but we don't know the cause. But this doesn't just happen with those strange experiences. This happens in science all the time. I'll give you an example. When I was an undergraduate in college, I was taking physics. And I loved physics. There's so many concepts that are just so cool. And I really got into it. I remember I was studying one day for a midterm, and I was studying magnetic fields. I was sitting there for hours in the library, reading this one chapter over and over again, and so I was missing something. I couldn't grasp it, like it just wouldn't stick in my head, and I was so frustrated. I went to the physics professor's office hours were there, knocked on his door, invited me in, and I'm literally almost in tears, and I said, I just don't understand magnetic fields. And he says, well, what is it that you don't understand? And I said, well, what are they? And he said, well, Sean, if you could figure that out, you've got the next Nobel Prize. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, we don't know what they are. We just know their effects. We don't know actually necessarily what causes them. And I was really stunned because science was supposed to explain everything. I said, well, why don't they say that? I'm holding up the textbook. And he said, because scientists want to seem like they know everything, when in fact we know very little. And I think sometimes we know those effects. We see the fairy, we hear a voice or a vision, but we don't know what's causing it. Is it a disorder, or is it something beyond our current understanding? I think this sort of omniscient understanding of science came about because of the reaction against religion and superstition in particular. And it made ridiculous that which was held dear by many people. And I'll be honest with you, I think there are some people who don't do it very diplomatically. This is why I think that my mother's generation, for example, they tend to not question doctors or scientists. They say it must be in the right since they have that sort of authority. But this science has become, to many, almost like a new god, one might say. I think that's part of what Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was talking about. We don't want to make a new god. But this understanding of science as omniscient is changing quite a bit as we learn more and more scientists admit that we don't actually know everything. So in fact, in 2011, the news reported that scientists had found a particle that was faster than the speed of light. You guys know about this? It's called a tachyon particle, and you thought Star Trek was fiction. They call it a tachyon particle. Now before this, they thought for anything to go faster than the speed of light, it would have to go backwards in time, and it would take infinite energy in order to do that. But they found this, and now they're like, well, maybe E equals mc squared is not law everywhere. Maybe Einstein might have been a little wrong. Or it doesn't apply to everything. More and more science are starting to accept this. That's what I loved about it. Actually, when this came out, it wasn't like scientists were like, oh, well, that's just a bunch of hooey. We're going to excommunicate those scientists at George Mason University. No, they actually said, oh, that's cool. Let's explore this further. It's, back in 1963, the atom, right, was found in protons, neutrons, electrons. They were considered the smallest form of matter. But 1 year later, in 1964, quarks were discovered. Something even smaller than atoms. I gotta wonder, does it even go even smaller than that? And here's the really cool thing about quarks, is that they seem to exist outside of space and time. Absolutely extraordinary. We cannot predict them. We don't know their cause yet. It turns out that there's yet another puzzle out there. Did you know that all matter in the universe has an opposite called antimatter? I don't exactly know how they figured this out, but it turns out that the world is made up mostly of matter. We see it around us, right? Matter is everywhere. But it turns out that in the universe, only 17% of the universe is made up of matter. 83% is made up of dark matter. And they actually don't know what that is. They just know of its gravitational effects on other stars. And they can measure it. They only know it exists because of its gravitational effect, right? I understand that this keeps physicists up at night. So it seems to me that the more we explore in science, the more we realize how little we understand the world around us. And how exciting is that? To not know everything. To keep our mind open. I mean, in 1492, right, we thought that the world was flat. And then we found out it was round. In 1859, we were given an exciting new theory of evolution of humankind. And in 2011, we found that matter can exist and be faster than the speed of light. How arrogant are we if we assume that we know everything now, and that's it, here in this moment, that we can explain everything. So then what are we supposed to do? Do we just throw up our hands whenever something extraordinary happens and we just say, oh, well, the heck with that. I don't know. Socrates might like that, right? I don't know. But I also think we miss something when we go in that place of just, well, whatever. Imagination is absolutely key to us as humans, as meaning makers, and to all the world and scientific world too. Imagination, which some say is the cause of many visions, is not just something that we make up meaning and stories from. It's what made Einstein come up with the theory of relativity. It's the leap that helped Darwin with the theory of evolution. It is only through the use of our imagination that we can continue to grow and learn. A theory really is simply taking the best available data and imagining what that might mean. Let's look at a very famous theory, evolution. Technically, it is still a theory. It's not technically yet a fact. It hasn't yet been proven. In fact, there's sort of this missing link, right, in a theory that's not yet been provable. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe in evolution, and I believe that it's a very, very good theory. That's what scientists do, though. They looked at the best available data, and they posit theories. And evolution makes sense, but even our understanding of evolution is changing. It's less about the survival of the strongest and more about the survival of those that adapt, that are adaptable. And just a year ago, they didn't find the missing link, but they found what they're calling Homo naledi. And in this link, that basically, it's kind of fascinating, they found this huge cache of bones deep, deep down into this cavern below. But the thing that's fascinating about this is that it points to ritualistic behavior, maybe possibly an understanding of an afterlife. And where they're placing this, I think it's something like 2 or 3 million years ago. This is long before they thought any humanoids had the ability to do that. So this could be changing our way in our understanding of the development of the human conscience. So science changes. It gets challenged and modified as new data becomes available, and that's a wonderful thing. I think there's a spiritual lesson in that. I think that sometimes we think that we have all the facts, we have the truth, whether it's scientific or it's spiritual in nature. But if we're good scientists, if we're good spiritual seekers, we're going to keep our minds open to that possibility, to all the possibilities that are out there. To not be so arrogant as to think that we have all the answers. And I think it's exciting that we know so little of our own universe and this creation that we're still learning. I think it's even more exciting that maybe there are other spiritual truths out there to be learned and explored. What we need to do is not be so arrogant as to think we know the truth now at all, and to remember to not endow everything that we experience with deep and wide meaning, but to hold that little bit of tension in there. What we need to do is not to be so arrogant as to think we know it all right now. Instead, to remember that we're sort of new at this science stuff. It really has been only the last 100 years or so that we've really taken it up. We're children learning about our world. So let's keep our minds open. Let's use our imaginations. Let's keep reviewing the current available data. And when we do this, we can see the world, our universe, in a whole new way. I'd like to give our last words today to Albert Einstein, the great scientist and mystic. He said this: there are two ways to live. You can live as if nothing is a miracle, you can live as if everything is a miracle. Blessed be, shalom, salam, and amen.